Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast, an emergency edition of the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. We're not even talking about the Big Ten. Well, we are going to talk about the Big Ten, but there's this little bit of news that happened last night. A football coach retired, just a normal happening, except it's Nick freaking Saban who retired, just completely out of the blue. And because it's Nick Saban, I had to get my buddy JR on the podcast because, for the big podcast, I got to have someone other than me. So JR, welcome to the pod. Thanks for coming on short notice. Tell the folks about your podcast real quick before we kind of jump into this.
Of course, of course. Thank you for having me on, Zach. I always appreciate it. Glad to be here, and always glad to have you over at my podcast as well, over at the Big Ten Huddle. We talk about Big Ten over there as well. It's kind of like a hodgepodge of different fans come on and stuff like that. Here, you get the consistent Zack, who gives you probably the wisdom and knowledge every single time he's on, and I have some wisdom and knowledge with my guys, but it's all Big Ten fans, all different kinds of podcasts. So, every podcast you might get something different, but it's a good time.
It is a good time. I love coming over and talking ball, and been trying to listen to you guys as you've been covering basketball as well. So if you guys are basketball fanatics, Big Ten Huddles where it's at. In fact, they are recording about 20 minutes after this. So
Yeah.
this is obviously dropping tomorrow morning, but make sure what days do you live stream for basketball?
Sunday night and Wednesday night at 9 is basketball, and then Tuesday night is 9 for football.
So make sure you tune in to JR and the Big Ten Huddle and all the big banter sports network. They've
Yeah.
been phenomenal to
And I'm not
us. And
retiring anytime soon. So,
well, okay. So speaking of retiring, so Nick Saban, arguably the greatest of all time.
yep.
He is currently 72 years old, and so it's probably not shocking in the sense that in terms of his age. Ironically, Pete Carroll also just retired, 72 years old. So there's
Yeah.
something in the water. There's some smoke to the reasoning why. We're not going to get into that yet until it's out there because JR and I were talking before the show. We just don't want to speculate, especially some of the things that we're hearing. Um, it could be more serious, and if it is, we want to let actual journalism take place and actual facts come out before we actually comment on the reasoning and the rationale. But certainly a surprise, especially with the way that he was coaching, the way he was recruiting. It was very sudden. A lot of players are coming out of the woodwork now saying they might transfer. So definitely, it was shocking to say the least. I want to get your take, JR. What we're going to talk a lot about legacy. I want to get your initial reaction, like as this was announced. What do you feel like the legacy of Nick Saban is?
Well, I mean, it's so far reaching. I'll just when I found out, I was in the kitchen. We were getting dinner ready for my family, and I just got a notification on my phone that says Nick Saban has retired. And I turned to my wife, who is not into sports at all. I mean, she kind of pays attention to Big Ten basketball a little bit, but she's really not into sports at all. And I said, "You'll never guess what just happened." And she said, "What?" I said, "Nick Saban just retired." And she said, "Oh my gosh, are you serious?" So like she's not a sports person at all. She knows who Nick Saban is. She knows the impact of Nick Saban retiring, just based on college football being on around her and stuff. I remember, I think it was the 2020 national championship I was watching, and she saw Nick Saban on the screen, and she said, "Oh my gosh, why is he on the screen all the time?" Because he's really good and he wins a lot of football games and he makes a lot of national championships. And
Mhm.
so, to me, that's the legacy. Is he is one of those coaches that has you know not that he's bigger than the sport, but he's reached beyond the sport. So that way he's not just known by the fans and the diehards and stuff like that, but he's known by basically anyone who pays attention to sports at all, because not only is he a great college football coach, but he is also, or was also, one of the greatest coaches of any sport there is.
Yeah, and I mean, 7 national championships, 6 at Alabama, 1 at LSU. Had a 2-year run in the NFL, and I think people misremember that run because it wasn't great, but it wasn't like he was 2-14 each year. I feel like that's how people talk about that. And I think people are just more mad because he jumped ship two
Right.
years in. And lest we forget that he really got his start. I believe he was at Toledo, and then he was in the Big Ten with Michigan State, and of course, probably his biggest win at Michigan State was against number one Ohio State, one of the most painful games probably either of us have ever watched. Uh, in 1998, Joe Germain and the number one Buckeyes get upset by this Nick Saban, who is an up and coming coach at that point. And it was a springboard to LSU, springboard to Alabama, where he has become probably bigger than Bear Bryant, if we're honest. Just the way he's made a name for himself there. It's interesting. I was looking at Alabama, and they have a rich history. I think it's 13 definitive national championships, and then before the poll era, everybody claimed a national championship. So we
Right.
try not to include those. But between I think Bear Bryant and Nick Saban, I think there's 13 or 12, and then I think Gene Stallings has another one.
Yeah.
But if you look at the gaps between the coaches, it's not like Ohio State and their run over the past 25, 30 years, where if they fell short, they typically didn't fall that short. Like there's a lot of fifth place, a lot of fourth place. And so it begs the question. I know we're in the era of transfer portal and whatnot, but like what are the implications for Alabama?
Well, Alabama is going to have to hire a coach who can bring players with him. I thought that was one of the greatest insights that Matt Rule gave when he came to Nebraska. Is he said, "Look, a rebuild here is going to take a little bit longer for me because he said I jumped from the NFL. He said I didn't have players who I had relationships with, and I brought them over." And those kind of things. He said because when a coach leaves, the kids leave, and typically the most talented players leave because they want to go somewhere where they believe in the culture, what's going on, can this team win, and maybe they're not sold on you coming in and rebuilding the program. And that's what Alabama is going to have to do if they don't want to take a dip. Because Nick Saban, he has a very, very talented roster. However, Nick Saban, the 30-day transfer portal window just started for Alabama. So Caleb Downs, Keon Keeley, you know, Jalen Milrow, if he wants to, they can all leave in 30 days and go find a home somewhere else, whether that's with more money, whether that's with more planning time, whatever it might be. So they're going to have to look for a coach who can bring some players with him to keep Alabama at the top.
Yeah, and I think this is where we get to maybe some of the implications in the Big Ten. This is obviously a Big Ten podcast. You and I both host Big Ten, Big Ten podcasts, and the reality is this has major repercussions in the Big Ten because of the transfer portal, because of recruiting, because of just the hole that Alabama has kind of filled the past, I think, 20 years, almost 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
How maybe the biggest question is the immediate names that come to mind for coaches: Dan Lanning, Dabo Swinney. I've heard Kirby Smart, another one. I don't think Kirby Smart's leaving Georgia,
No.
but Dan Lanning is probably the biggest, hottest name right now, and he's now a Big Ten as of January 8th, like 11:45 p.m.,
Yeah.
he's a Big Ten head coach. So is he not going to be a Big Ten coach for more than like 4 days?
Yeah, that was my immediate thought too. Was, oh wow, Alabama just lost the best coach in the game. Maybe the Big Ten's going to have better coaches than the SEC. Well, that is if Alabama doesn't take one of those best coaches in the Big Ten, like a Dan Lanning, maybe like a Kalen DeBoer. I've even seen James Franklin's name floated out there because his buyout isn't very big. So, do I think James Franklin is somebody who could actually be? I don't think so, but his name's out there, so I guess anything could happen. But that's going to be a big thing because they might just poach from the Big Ten one of these up and coming coaches.
Yeah, I would be curious what Penn State's reactions would be if James Franklin somehow ended up with the Alabama job. But yeah, I think I was surprised to see. I think I saw your tweet on that actually, that James Franklin was a name to watch. Um, but yeah, I think Dan Lanning is certainly a name to watch out for. Um,
And what's hilarious to me about that was what my tweet was I said, James Franklin on this list is hilarious, not because I think James Franklin is a bad coach or anything like that, but number one, Penn State fans this season, after watching James Franklin lose to Ohio State and Michigan again, were kind of vying for him to be fired. Kind of move on from
mhm.
James Franklin. Not all of them, but some of them were. So there's that. And then number two, I just, Brian Kelly went down to LSU, and that was kind of comical. So to me, it's like, does James Franklin really fit, you know, Alabama, the South, and stuff like that? I don't think so. I'm sure, anybody can remake themselves and go down there, but it just doesn't seem like a fit to me. I could never envision James Franklin leading the Alabama Crimson Tide out onto the field. I couldn't envision it.
Yeah, yeah. I just had I wondered if James Franklin has a good fake Alabama accent that he could.
Yes.
I don't think that's gonna happen. Brian Kelly, cringiest,
Peak cringe.
yeah, cringiest coaching transition maybe ever. Um, I how do you think this impacts? And obviously, it depends on the coach. But how do you think this impacts recruiting, not just for Alabama, but for the Big Ten? And maybe this leads to another question too: is like, who benefits the most in the Big Ten from this?
Well, the teams I think about that have had the most recruiting battles with Alabama, obviously Ohio State, you hear about them pretty often. Michigan has a lot of recruiting battles with Alabama as well. A cornerback out of the transfer portal, that Jackson kid from USC, Damani, I think is his name. He just committed to USC, so or not USC, to Alabama. So does he decommit there? Head on over to Michigan. We'll see. In Oregon, they've been in some recruiting battles there as well. So to me, it can really affect the top tier. And you look at Alabama's strategy for recruiting, which has been offensive line, defensive line. And if they bring in a coach who's not able to recruit at that same level with those linemen, I think we could see some more parity with maybe some more Big Ten teams and possibly some more teams down south. I know we're talking about Big Ten implications, but I also think about a team like Auburn. Hugh Freeze is there.
Yeah,
If he can get some more line play, could could be looking at a resurgence for Auburn here as well if Alabama does not hire the right coach.
yeah. Well, and even going outside the SEC and the Big Ten, you know, we talked a lot about Florida State getting shafted. Well, some of those linemen might go Tallahassee. You wonder even maybe the Florida Gators, different teams. I know Florida's in the SEC.
Do you think Penn State? Um, do you think they benefit at all?
I mean, I think so. I think there's a bit of a ripple or a trickle down effect too. And not to say that Penn State is that much further down the line, but
No,
one thing that Franklin's been good at is recruiting. And so,
they are recruit Michigan most times.
yeah, yeah, I think this is the first year that they were like as close as they've been in a long in quite a few years actually. Um, so I do think Penn State it, it certainly helps them. I don't know how many outright recruiting battles they've had with Alabama over the years, but I mean it's one less school that they have to fight, and they at least get some of the big names. So yeah, I think Penn State for sure. Let me
Yeah.
let me send you out on this because I know you gotta head out here soon. But the SEC perception and mystique, I felt like it started with Urban Meyer back in 2006, but Nick Saban really kind of anchored it down. How does his retirement change maybe the future of conference perception?
Well, I think we were talking about this on a episode of my Big Ten Huddle podcast the other day, and I don't think it really does a lot
Okay.
because I think they're going to hire a really good coach. Like I said, a Dan Lanning type, somebody like that. And overall, the Big Ten, um, they really they eat each other a lot. They kind of go after each other. The rivalries are not just with each other, but they want to see them lose to other teams as well. In the SEC, you have Auburn fans. It's not uncommon for them to be rooting for Alabama. It's not
Yep.
uncommon to see Georgia fans rooting for Alabama. I saw an Alabama fan the other day. Fighting and saying, "Yeah, Georgia would beat Michigan because the SEC is the best," and it's like, you know, that would never happen in the Big Ten.
No.
Penn State fans would never say, "Yeah, Michigan would totally beat this team because the Big Ten's the best." No, they'd say, "Screw Michigan, we hate them." you know, like, and so I think that's one of the biggest things that people overlook about conference perception is that the Big Ten, they put each other down a lot, and they talk each other down a lot. Just go over to Joel Klatt's show and look at the comment section. If Joel Klatt says anything kind about Ohio State, you'll see Michigan, Penn State, even like Illinois fans in there saying, "Oh no, Joel, you're wrong. Ohio State stinks." You see him say anything nice about Michigan, you'll see Ohio State, Iowa, all these fans saying, "Ah, no, Joel, you're wrong. Michigan, they stink." It's just the culture of the conference,
Yep.
and I think that if conference, you know, domination, I guess, is your goal, the SEC, I think they're still going to dominate in that area just based off the culture of it alone. Do you see the same thing I'm seeing?
Well, it's funny. I was thinking after Michigan won the national championship, nobody was chanting "Go Big Ten." They were, in fact, most Big Ten uh, opponents were saying it has an asterisk, which I was like,
Right.
I'm not going to touch that. Not going to do
I'm not
that.
going
But
there.
it was definitely, and I think it's similar. By the way, Illini fans might be the most underrated fan base.
You should see
Like,
him in basketball, man.
oh my gosh, like, and I love them. Like, they comment on the show a lot, and often it's because I say something that they're like, "I can't believe you said that about our team," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, no, I just stepped on a landmine," and I don't mean that to Illini fans. Like, I love y'all, but I mean they're like, I think that's something that people don't realize about Big Ten fan bases is
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, I've gotten a huge following with Rutgers fans this year,
Same.
and they're great. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
they love their team, and they're very knowledgeable, and they're very um and I think this is true of all the fan bases in the Big Ten, but they don't care about the other, like, they care about the other teams, they care about conference perception, but only to the point that it benefits them, and then they're
Right.
like, "Oh, they lost? Oh, well, whatever. They stink anyway." It's
Right.
like, nobody else, like, yeah, the SEC, the ACC, I feel like there's a lot more conference pride. So,
Right. Well, and I say all this. I'm not talking about other people. A lot of it, I'm talking about myself as well. I was one of those people posting the asterisks and saying cheaters and stuff like that after the national championship because in my mind, that's that's what college sports is. It's
yeah.
rivalries. It's you root hard for your team to win. You root just as hard for your rivals to lose. And of course it's all just in good fun. I had a Michigan fan DM me the other day and tell me I was a terrible person and all this stuff, and I'm like, dude, you're taking this
No.
way too seriously, man.
Oh,
It's it's all just for fun, and we should never get to the point where we're insulting somebody else or anything like that. Like, just it's all for fun. A little bit of trash talk here and there, but to me, that's what college sports is. Uh, rooting for your, like I said, rooting for your team and rooting for your and rooting against your rival just as much as you root for your team. And I think the Big Ten does that. But I don't see it from the SEC like I see it from the Big Ten.
yeah, they got that southern hospitality where they wanna avoid
For each
all
other, nobody
controversy.
else.
Yeah. Yeah. But well, I know you gotta head out here. So thanks again for jumping on here for just a quick kind of reaction to this. This is big news. It's gonna, I think, change the landscape of college football in big ways. And so again, this is the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Check out the Big Ten Huddle on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get podcasts. Make sure you check them out. Jr., thanks again, man. Really appreciate having you on the show.
Thanks a lot, Zach. I appreciate you too, man.
Yep.